I'm today talking about presence, that is with a C-E at the end, not T-S, presence. And I have some different sort of thoughts about it, meditations, and I hope you'll stay with me, even if they don't all seem connected, at least right at first. One of them is the reading we just heard from the Reverend Gordon McKeeman, which I think is interesting because part of presence is, of course, being fully authentic to who you are. Gordon McKeeman was a legend of our Unitarian Universalist ministry for decades, just a great presence. And one of the things I say when I say authenticity about him is no one who ever knew him actually calls him Gordon. That was the name he used in print, but he was universally known as Bucky, which I assume was a childhood nickname, but being present means being fully who we are. So I want to call upon the spirit of Bucky to help me today. I was thinking, too, about how in my life in the last year or two I've become a hockey dad, which was something I never expected growing up in Texas. I don't skate at all, but two of my three children have taken up hockey as their sort of primary sports activity. And I was talking to one of them about tactics, and the idea of presence just jumped its head up again, that you have to be in the right moment, in the right space. You have to be physically present. And we were talking about a specific situation and where he should be. He was too far from the boards to adequately protect that. Anyway, it gets technical. But it really made me think about presence in a different way. And a third thing I was thinking about is I was speaking to a friend from seminary, well, texting, actually, not speaking, but anyway. And this friend is a Christian minister. He serves a church that is a member of the United Church of Christ, which I won't get into the whole history, but they're actually really our cousins, denominationally speaking. We come from exactly the same heritage. We just split a little bit about 150 years ago. And they're wonderful people, if you don't know them. I have more reservations about the Church of Christ. Just to be really clear, the United Church of Christ and the Church of Christ are very different. Okay, never mind. Anyway, as these things go, we got to talking about a class we took together in seminary. It was about worship practices, and we got to talking about the ritual of communion, which some of you know exactly what I mean, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. I mean communion where bread and wine are shared as a way of receiving grace and connecting with God, specifically with Jesus. In our community, this is not something we do regularly. It's not part of our ritual practices particularly, though it is certainly part of our heritage. It is perhaps not something some of us have ever experienced outside of seeing it on a TV show or something. But in many Christian circles, not all of them, but many of them, this is not only common, but it's the central practice for worshiping communities. And I think probably most of us know this, but I just want to be clear about it. Excuse me. To go back to seminary for just a second, many UU ministers, and myself included, go to Christian seminaries for part of our ministerial formation. That's most of the accredited seminaries in the United States are Christian. I attended two of them, actually. The Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Austin, Texas, where I grew up, and then Andover Newton Theological School, which at the time was in Boston. They've actually since moved to Connecticut to be part of the Yale Divinity School. I also took classes from Starr King School for the Ministry, which is a Unitarian Universalist seminary, and from Harvard Divinity School. And though you would have to be pretty inside baseball in religious academia to know this, but that's a very diverse set of institutions in terms of size, in terms of history, in terms of the class, all sorts of things. And so I had a lot of classmates from different traditions, including those from a pretty broad spectrum of Christianity, which was really interesting for me to learn about some of the differences in their beliefs and practices, and some of the overlaps and some of the divides. So back to communion, the ritual sharing of bread and wine. In seminary, in Christian seminary at least, you spend a lot of time talking about the meaning of things, theological ideas, rituals, scripture passages, pastoral identity, which I'll come back to in a minute, how to care for people. And one of the things we spent a bit of time on was communion, which even for someone like me who doesn't regularly practice communion, it was an interesting thing to think about. In fact, it was especially interesting because I didn't go in with a lot of preconceived notions or beliefs about it. One of the things I learned, as I alluded to a moment ago, is that different Christians believe very different things about communion and about what the ritual actually means. And in fact, over the centuries, there have been both polite and very unpolite discussions about this in Christian circles. And we had in our class a very polite version of that, don't worry. But this is the sort of thing that faithful communities have literally gone to war about. So a capsule description, and this is really oversimplifying things. But I think it's worth getting into for a moment. There is an idea called transubstantiation, which is a great word, by the way. And my friends here who are from a Catholic background probably know exactly what I mean by that, but I'll just let everyone know. It's the idea that when communion is shared, the bread and wine literally turn into the body and blood of Christ. And this is not what I believe, but I respect the commitment, the idea that if you're participating in this, you are literally sharing together in Jesus' community in a very raw, physical kind of way. Now, there are a lot of other ideas, too. One common in many Protestant communities is that the ritual is a purely symbolic act, a thing done in memory, which is another fine way to think about it as far as I'm concerned. And then there's a third idea, and there are actually, of course, dozens of more ideas, but I'm simplifying it down to 3. There's another idea that was the one that really resonated with me, and not just about communion, but about a lot of things in my life. And this is an idea called real presence. It's the idea that when you take communion, it's not literally Jesus' body and blood. It's still bread and wine. But it's also not only a symbolic act, though it's that too. But it's something more and different than both of those. When you're sharing wine and bread in the ritual, that's what it is, yes, but it also the real presence of Jesus is there. And I think about this a lot. What does real presence mean? Okay, so that was sort of a long and winding road to introduce what I want to talk about today, which is, as I said, presence. In fact, I think there's a clever joke somewhere about the difference between presents with a TS, the things you put under the Christmas tree, and presents with a CE, being here for the things that matter. But I didn't manage to figure out that joke in time for the sermon, so you'll have to imagine I said something really funny here. So another thing that gets a lot of time in seminary and ministerial formation is something we call ministerial presence, which is kind of hard to define. But it's something like embodying the role of minister through one's appearance and actions and very being. It means that when congregants or attendees to our congregation or people in the community see you, they think, that's a minister, whatever that means. I still don't know, and I'm doing this for 12 years now. It's a complicated thing, to be sure. For instance, it's a lot easier for me as a middle-aged, able-bodied white dude with a big voice to seem like most people's conception of a minister. And many of my colleagues have to work a lot harder to get the sort of authority that is usually easily given to me. And this is part of what we refer to when we speak of privilege. When you already meet the preconceived notion our society has, it's like playing on the easy mode in a video game. But of course, that's not a just or moral thing. And so working to understand and unpack and ultimately unwind privilege is a core part of our mission as Unitarian Universalists. But as to presence, learning about the concept of ministerial presence made me more aware of presence in general. Because, of course, we have notions of what, say, a parental presence is like or should be. We have ideas about how all sorts of various jobs or life roles should appear in the world. And for me, that's something that I struggle with. How can you be present enough in all of the areas of one's life? How can I be present enough in my work here as a minister and also be present to my children who need and deserve all I have to give? Or present to my amazing wife? Or present to my own needs? And maybe you're having similar struggles. How can we be present to making sure our country doesn't fall apart or that climate change doesn't further destroy our world? I don't have enough time to do all these things well. Maybe some people do, but I don't. And really, when I say time, I don't necessarily mean time per se. I mean energy or willpower or sheer ability. Another colleague of mine, a UU minister named David Pyle, once said that his greatest limitation in ministry wasn't having enough time or enough skills or enough want to. It was having enough mental and emotional energy for the work day after day. That is to say, sometimes for instance, a short pastoral visit might not take very much time, but it takes a lot of energy to be present to that person and what they need. And I don't think this is uniquely a ministry thing. It may be more acute than some jobs, but I know it's not unique. I speak as often as I can to my children's teachers, to give one example, and I literally cannot imagine spending 6 or 7 hours a day with the children they do and having anything left in order to function in any other part of my life. And I know, too, that this isn't merely this often gets framed as kind of a white-collar thing, right? The thinking jobs. But I know that's not true either. It's exhausting to do labor, too, in an entirely different way. I think of my grandfather. Both my grandfathers, in fact, were woodworkers, but I never knew my dad's father. He died young. My other grandfather was a woodworker and a pattern maker and a sort of self-taught engineer as well. He spent a lot of time working with his hands, and some of it was very physically demanding. But it wasn't just physically demanding, it required focus and precision and care in a way that I didn't understand until I worked with him for a while. And I'll never forget the thing he told me once, and this was he was already in his 70s and still working part-time by his choice, not because he had to. He told me that one of the things he was most proud of, in a life with a lot of proud accomplishments, by the way, but one of the things he was most proud of was that at his age, and with 50 years in his business, he still had all 10 of his fingers. Which was something that, if you looked around the wood shop, very few people in his profession with 50 years' experience could say. He didn't say this as a joke. He actually was truly proud of it. And it was because he was extraordinarily committed to safety, something that he made clear from the very instant you walked into his shop. He was also exceptionally skilled, and he had the sort of focus that I envy. And I think about that for presence, the amount of presence that he put into his work, and the presence that it took to do a good job at it. But also, presence just requires that you, in all your glory, in all your faults, all of who you are just that, present. Being present doesn't mean being perfect. Though he had all 10 fingers, I also saw him throw away plenty of mistakes. He cut boards the wrong length more often than any of us do. He also cut boards the right length far more often than any of us do, I guarantee you. In this season, presence, the one with the CE at the end, is a lot more important than presence with a TS. And that's not the message that you'll hear from commercials or companies, or even the explicit message you might hear from children, though I think underneath that they might have a different feeling if they could dig into that. Because you are the greatest gift that you can give anyone else. And as I said, thinking into the spirit of Bucky McKeeman, presence works best with people that you can truly be yourself with. So whoever that is for you, I urge you to find time with them, in person, virtual, on the phone, writing a letter, whatever, to be present to them and to the person that you can be with them. So friends, may your holiday season be exactly what you need. May it be filled with presence with a CE and presence with a TS, to whatever degree works best for you. And I remind you that this community is always here for you too. I hope to see you again this month for any and all of our gatherings, and wish you a very present holiday season. May it be so.